Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 241 to 250. Of course, when Lynn said these words, it was not only to gain sympathy but also to serve as a warning. Lynn knew that Amoniz's wariness wouldn't be completely dispelled by just one act of pity. Thus, his words were both a warning and a means to mislead the Evernight goddess. Unlike Russell, who had encountered his true form by accident and was in a desperate situation waiting for Lynn to rescue him, Amonizes neither understood Lynn nor knew what kind of existence stood behind him. Additionally, Amonizes was not in a desperate situation. Therefore, Lynn didn't choose to treat Amonizes the same way he treated Russell. He did not reveal the harmlessness of his true form in normal circumstances or his plans if he were to inevitably lose himself. Lynn knew that even if he said this, Amonizes would most likely not believe him. Even if she did, it might not necessarily be a good thing for him. The original story had already taught Lynn not to believe in the mercy of gods. So, Lynn's choice was simple. He used his power to intimidate Amonizes first and then expressed his goodwill with the bargaining chip of saving her family, thus taking the first step towards cooperation. By revealing part of the truth, Lynn aimed to soften Amonizes' attitude while also giving a warning and a hint. Since Lynn would lose himself upon gaining power, the critical question arose: who could grant Lynn such overwhelming power, and why would he lose himself because of it? Why would he even prefer to abandon this power and choose to become an ordinary Sequence Zero to save himself? From Lynn's perspective, he knew that he was merely seeking independence. His true form had no interest in replacing him and was even happy to see him gain independence. However, from Amonizes' perspective, given the world's background with situations like, the original creator has awakened in me, the mysteries has awakened in me, and, the God Almighty has awakened in me, Lynn's state was reminiscent of Klein at the end of the original story, who gained power to save others but lost himself in the process. Amonizes, as an experienced Sequence Zero, could certainly guess this situation, even without knowing the original story. Although this still couldn't fully explain Lynn's situation, many things in this world were inherently inexplicable. At least, for Amonizes, the most plausible explanation was that Lynn might be the vessel for the resurrection of a great old one, a pillar, or even more absurd existence, and thus had inherited part of their power, such as some special characteristics beyond the 22 pathways. This was not unimaginable since the world didn't originally only have 22 pathways, the outer gods were the best proof of that. The more Lynn used this power, the more the consciousness of that existence within him would awaken. Just like how the ancient gods will within ordinary beyonders awakened more as they ascended, when Lynn fully inherited that power, it would mean he had been replaced and lost himself. But Lynn Sotos was clearly not someone who would wait to die. Becoming a paragon was his effort to break free. Amonizes' mind worked quickly, then she recalled something and added in her heart. No, it wasn't just that. In the second epoch, Lynn was clearly on the mystery prior pathway, but now he had become a knowledge magister on the Savant pathway. This was obviously more than just a jump to an adjacent pathway. Perhaps Lynn's true goal was to become a dual-sequence true god and then contain the knowledge more, as a result becoming a great old one. Only a great old one could barely resist the awakening consciousness within themselves. Although the process was mistaken, Amonizes had accurately guessed Lynn's goal. Although Lynn had no intention of hiding this. However, a question soon arose in Amonizes' mind. She looked at Lynn and asked, why the mystery prior and the Savant? These two pathways did not correspond to the most powerful existences, at least not comparable to the Lord of Mysteries or the God Almighty. Given Lynn's characteristics, Amonizes didn't think it would be harder for him to become the Mysteries or the Almighty compared to becoming the Demon of Knowledge. Hearing Amonizes' question, Lynn blinked. He could see what Amonizes was thinking and knew his act of pity and warning had worked, but Amonizes' question genuinely puzzled him. Why had he never considered becoming the Lord of Mysteries or the God Almighty? Why not become a pillar? Was it because his alias had started on the mystery prior pathway? No. Lynn denied this in his heart. It wasn't that he couldn't adopt other aliases, and forcibly jumping to a non-adjacent pathway might drive others half-mad, but for Lynn, it wasn't necessarily so. Even if he did go half-mad, Lynn could find a way to heal himself and quietly expel the non-adjacent characteristics. This wasn't impossible, like the ancient goddess Lilith, who had once been in a state of mixed characteristics madness but eventually managed to expel the extra characteristics and now was a normal sequence 0. Adam initially had the Blood Emperor tutor forcibly jump pathways, surely not to lead him to a dead end. Even if Adam considered tutor a tool, the sane tutor wouldn't have chosen a dead end. He chose to jump pathways because, as a sequence 0, he could slowly expel other characteristics and return to normal. So was it because of Saussure and Klein's existence. Lynn thought about it and also denied this. If it were now, he would indeed consider them and not compete, but earlier, before his relationship with them improved, Lynn had also never thought of becoming the Lord of Mysteries or the God Almighty. They were different from what Mother Goddess of Depravity represented as a pillar. Regardless of her nature as a pitfall, needing to confront her to become the complete Great Old One, and what she represented made Lynn dismiss the idea. He wasn't interested in becoming a woman, and the price of confronting the Mother Goddess of Depravity was too high. For his true form, the Mother Goddess of Depravity was no big deal, but for Lynn, even if he could borrow his true self's power to deal with her, the cost would be too great, leading him to rationally give up. So why have I never considered becoming the Lord of Mysteries or the God Almighty, as if I instinctively ruled out these choices from the beginning? Lynn frowned his brows tightly, as if trying to explore the reason for this avoidance. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Amonizes, sitting opposite Lynn, noticed the change in his expression. She did not interrupt but watched him intently, knowing she might have accidentally touched on a crucial question. Suddenly, Amonizes saw Lynn react as if waking from a nightmare. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his teacup and dishes. No. Amonizes heard Lynn say. Despite his young voice, there was a firm determination in it. I cannot walk those two paths, or he will descend upon this world instantly. Amonizes was stunned, looking at the child who appeared no different from before, but she sensed a significant change in him. Lynn no longer seemed like a mischievous child, he was more mature, colder, as if the world meant nothing to him. This change made Amonizes think that the divinity within Lynn had overpowered his humanity or that a part of some existence within him was awakening further. Lynn, however, was too preoccupied to care about Amonizes' thoughts because he had remembered why he instinctively rejected becoming the Lord of Mysteries or God Almighty. Because these two entities represented aspects of his true form in this world. This correspondence wasn't about power but a symbolic meaning. For ordinary people, this symbolism was irrelevant, but for his true self, if Lynn, as his avatar, became the Lord of Mysteries or God Almighty, it would strengthen this symbolic link. Lynn would not only be unable to break free from his true self but also cause it to descend upon this world. This was not intentional but a natural consequence. Of course, his true self could refuse to descend, but who would take that risk? Lynn certainly couldn't. He knew his true form's descent wouldn't just mean his own end but also potentially the world's destruction. Not because his true self intended to destroy anything, but simply because its existence was too massive for this world to bear. It's like adults don't usually intend to step on ants, but just by walking, they might crush ants underfoot. Wait, I think I remember why my true form looked at the Mother Goddess of Depravity. It was related to an entity of similar status. What was its name again? Lynn's thoughts drifted for a moment. He had many questions, like why his true self, clearly having dominion over knowledge, didn't correspond with the demon of knowledge he aimed to become. Perhaps there were details he didn't know, such as his true self symbolizing not just knowledge but omniscience and omnipotence, which corresponded to God Almighty's omniscience and omnipotence but not the demon of knowledge. However, Lynn knew he couldn't think too deeply. He was sure he had lost some knowledge and memories, but this loss was a self-protection measure. Some knowledge, once recalled, would end his journey of seeking independence prematurely. He would return to his true form, becoming. So Lynn closed his eyes and sat back down, calming his emotions by thinking of happy things to escape his current state. Recalling this knowledge had put him in a state of assimilation, even more severe than borrowing Sequence 0 power, but fortunately, it was still reversible. Suddenly, Lynn felt a serene calm, not the coldness of divinity, but a genuine sense of peace. In this calm, Lynn gradually regained his composure. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes and saw the Evernight goddess standing beside him, watching him. He suddenly gestured and said, Amonizes, you look so short like this. Have you considered wearing something to look taller? Amonizes. The Evernight goddess silently tugged at her cloak, stepped back a few paces, and sat down again. It seems your state has returned to normal. Sorry for losing my composure. But you share some blame. If you hadn't asked that question, I wouldn't have recalled things I shouldn't. Lynn first apologized weakly, then shifted to confidently blaming her. It is indeed my fault. Amonizes did not get angry but said, I hope it didn't cause you too much trouble. Amonizes was probing Lynn's current state of the unknown entity's awakening. Before this incident, Amonizes might have hesitated to help Lynn become a paragon, but now she was determined. No matter Lynn's personality, he didn't seem hostile to the world or humanity. However, the entity influencing Lynn, potentially awakening within him, was undoubtedly a threat similar to the Lordofthemysteries. Such an entity's descent would spell disaster for humanity. Of course, Amonizes had other options, like killing Lynn, the resurrection vessel, early. But it was extremely difficult. A being that could walk freely through various times and spaces, existing simultaneously, couldn't be killed in one place without considering his presence in another. Moreover, Amonizes had some affection for Lynn and needed him to save her family. So, she wouldn't try that method unless absolutely necessary. Don't worry, it's not severe enough to cause irreversible damage. Lynn waved his hand, then tidied up the overturned items on the table. He remembered something and fetched a pile of boxes. Lynn took out a black box with a star design and handed it to Amonizes. These are clothes I made specifically for this gathering. This is a hanfu for you, styled after the Tang dynasty. The size might differ, but it won't affect wearing it. If you want to wear it, you can change in the building next door. If not, keep it as a souvenir. Lynn appeared very casual about it. End of chapter. It seems you've prepared a gift for everyone. Amonizes glanced at the pile of boxes and opened the one Lynn handed over. Inside was a bright yellow dress. However, it wasn't the ordinary dress that the Evernight goddess had imagined. Instead, it resembled the kind of imperial attire Amonizes had seen in TV dramas, just much smaller, clearly designed for a 7 or 8-year-old child. How is it? Doesn't it suit your temperament perfectly? Lynn said, pouring himself another cup of tea. Amonizes was noncommittal. She took the dress to the room Lynn pointed out and changed, though it took a bit longer due to her unfamiliarity with the garment. When Amonizes emerged, she noticed another guest had joined Lynn at the table. From the appearance and form, it was clear that the new arrival was the Earth Mother, or Lilith, in her child form. As Amonizes saw Lynn and Lilith, they naturally noticed her as well. The outfit Lynn had prepared was of undeniably high quality and luxury. When worn by Amonizes, it created an effect of 1 + 1 = 2. Although she still appeared to be only about 1.2 meters, 3 feet 11 inches tall, her presence seemed to grow to 1.4 meters, 4 feet 3 inches, exuding the aura of a true empress, causing others to overlook her youthful appearance. Impressive, my sister. Lynn clapped his hands like a seal, expressing his straightforward admiration for Amonizes. Next to him, Lilith, who had been wearing a polite smile and seemed to be probing Lynn, also brightened up. She ran over to Amonizes with her short legs and hooked her arm around her. Amonizes, perhaps today the title of Goddess of Beauty suits you better. She said this with a sweet smile, though her eyes quickly met Amonizes, clearly exchanging a silent communication. Lynn was aware of the exchange between the two goddesses but didn't mind. He simply smiled and said, just now, while you were away, Miss Lilith and I briefly discussed our views on the mother goddess of depravity. However, she still holds great doubt about me, so we didn't delve into many topics. Perhaps you could explain my presence to Miss Lilith. Lynn's words were true. He and the Earth Mother hadn't talked much. Aside from some meaningless pleasantries, only a couple of sentences were of any substance. But Lynn didn't mind this at all. After all, he had no prior relationship with the Earth Mother, and it was normal for such a situation at their first meeting. It was to change this that he had decided to host the tea party of the gods. At the same time, he didn't expect to bond deeply with these gods in the first session. There was plenty of time in the future. Thus, Lynn decided not to use the same strategy he had with the Death Console but to step back and let Amonises, Lilith's staunch ally, explain the situation. This would be much more efficient than doing it himself. Lynn always understood that different people required different approaches. So, looking at the two goddesses who were like close friends, he stood up and said, "It seems there are other guests arriving. I'll go greet them. You two can chat or walk around as you like. Oh, and Miss Lilith, your outfit is here. If you find it suitable, you can change into it as well." Lynn pulled out a box with rice and vines as the main design and handed it to Lilith. Then he packed the remaining boxes into his spatial pocket and walked off in a certain direction. Due to the complex structure of the garden, Lynn quickly disappeared from the two goddesses' sight. Amonises, who exactly is he? After Lynn left, Lilith released her hold on the Evernight goddess' arm, her sweet voice tinged with confusion as she brushed back her hair. Lilith had never met Lynn, though Lynn and Medici had once secretly watched her fall. She had been too focused on faking her death to notice the two Sequence 2s spectating nearby. But Lilith was not completely unfamiliar with the name Lynn Sotos. However, like Solomon, without specific reminders, she couldn't detect any discrepancies in her memory, thus not realizing that Libert was Lynn Sotos. Nevertheless, Lilith could sense Lynn's uniqueness. What the Evernight goddess could think of, Lilith could also consider, which is why she had been probing Lynn earlier. "I can't really explain. In fact, I don't know much, and I can't guarantee the accuracy of the information I have." Amonises rubbed her temples. Her mind was in turmoil, as Lynn involved a vast amount of information. Although Amonises appeared calm, this was due to her strong expression control. Internally, her mind was filled with various speculations and doubts. After glancing around, Amonises said, "We should leave here. This isn't the best place to chat. After all, who knew when the next guest might suddenly appear?" All right. Lilith surprisingly didn't object. However, before leaving, she looked at the box with the dress and said, "Wait, let me change. Since I've decided to attend this gathering, I should follow the host's rules to some extent." Amonises didn't oppose this, although she understood that Lilith's desire to change was mostly due to her fondness for the unique and beautiful dress. This was one of Lilith's rare hobbies. As the epitome of beauty, she never stopped pursuing it. She loved not only dressing herself beautifully but also had a particular fondness for dolls. As far as Amonises knew, Lilith had even dedicated a room to house her dolls and their outfits, strictly forbidding others from entering. Although Amonises couldn't understand this hobby, she had no objections to it. In fact, most high-ranking deities had unique hobbies. For instance, the Lord of Storms loved singing, though his singing wasn't great, and the Evernight goddess would frown every time she heard it. This wasn't because these high-ranking beings were particularly human. On the contrary, it was because they often lacked humanity, clinging to their few remaining hobbies to retain some semblance of it. Even the Evernight goddess had her relatively ordinary hobbies like watching the stars and gardening. End of chapter. As the two goddesses whispered to each other, Lynn also saw the new guests at the tea party. To be more precise, they were divided into two groups, currently facing off against each other. On the left was the alliance of Solomon and the true creator. Even though Solomon had turned into a child, he still wore a stern expression, frowning at the symmetrical buildings around him. The true creator was fully cloaked, only revealing a pair of eyes. Ouroboros still looked like the child Lynn had seen before, standing absent-mindedly next to the true creator. At the front stood Medici, who, despite his 7-year-old appearance, still exuded arrogance. With his arms crossed and a provocative smile on his face, he looked at the group on the right, occasionally throwing out taunts. "Hey, little raven, I heard someone blew you up. I thought you were done for, but you still look lively. Seems like you'll live to see tomorrow's sun. Medici, I heard your brain got damaged after being resurrected." "Seems true," Amon from the right faction responded, adjusting his monocle and glancing sideways at something before sighing. "I envy you, having a brother willing to resurrect you, unlike me." Though his words seemed like casual banter, Amon was probing Medici's attitude towards his brother, Libert. Of course, there was also an intention to sow discord. Amon knew Medici was a proud individual. Indeed, the right faction was led by the Blood Emperor Tudor, who was looking impatiently at the opposite group. Despite being younger, Tudor still retained his irritable nature. Next to him was Bethel, smiling helplessly at the situation, and two small figures, Antigonus and his sister, the Mother of the Sky, huddled in a corner, examining the wall patterns. Amon stood at the forefront, exchanging barbs with Medici. The tension in the air was palpable, even without any overt actions. It was clear that the two factions could start fighting at any moment. Fight! Fight! Lynn's eyes lit up at the sight, nearly waving a little flag, fully enjoying the spectacle. Hearing this, Medici's eyebrow twitched. He looked at Lynn, who stood there with a face saying, "Start the fight," and retorted, "I seem to recall someone promising the safety of all Tea Party participants." "Yes, I guarantee your safety, but that doesn't conflict with my desire to see you fight." Lynn nodded confidently, even assuring, "Don't worry, as long as I'm here, no matter how bruised and battered you get, I'll make sure you're all healed." "Ha!" Medici sneered, "You just want to see a bunch of kids fight." "No, no, no. I have no interest in watching real kids fight, that would hurt my conscience. I'm interested in seeing you lot fight." "How entertaining." Lynn said sincerely, making no effort to hide his intentions. Hearing this, Medici, the true creator, and the others, familiar with Lynn's nature, were unsurprised. Medici merely sneered again, while Solomon gave Lynn a curious glance but said nothing. "I hope we're not late," Bethel interjected, aiming to diffuse the tension. Only he could do this. If Saussure wasn't mad, he might have been able to help stop Lynn, but since he is incapable, the responsibility fell to Mr. Dorr, the second-generation father figure. "No, no, you're the third group to arrive. Before you, the guests were the Evernight Goddess and the Earth Mother." Lynn waved it off, now taking a good look at Bethel in his 7 or 8-year-old state. Young Bethel appeared much softer, lacking the vampire duke from novels vibe, resembling a well-mannered noble boy. With numerous jeweled ornaments, he looked like a prince from a shoujo manga. Lynn blinked, confirming what he saw, and remarked, "Bethel, has anyone told you that you look like a completely different person when you're not frowning? You were so adorable as a child. When you grew up, well, not that you're bad looking now, but you don't have this same charm." Lynn felt more justified in his decision to let Bethel experience life at different ages. Bethel was no longer the stiff person he used to be, he was softer now. Hearing this, Bethel awkwardly tugged at his gem-encrusted sleeve. He had considered maintaining his stern demeanor but remembered Lynn's advice about experiencing different stages of life. It seemed his attempts were successful, but Bethel wondered if Lynn had been completely truthful. All right. Since you're not planning to fight, let's head to the banquet hall," Lynn suggested, ushering them like schoolchildren on a field trip. The two groups exchanged glances, neither intending to fight, and followed Lynn. As they walked, Lynn handed out outfits to each of them. While walking beside Medici, Lynn whispered loudly, "Little Red, I'll tell you a secret. Amon's abilities are limited to a sequence 2 level unless his life is in danger." Giving Medici a meaningful look, he implied, "Settle your scores today." Though Tudor was off limits for now, a minion like Amon wasn't. End of chapter. Medici indeed understood. He looked at Amon, who had somehow fallen to the back of the group. Seeing Medici's gaze, Amon adjusted his monocle and gave a provocative smile. Then, he turned and ran, while throwing away the dignity of the King of Angels, not wanting to stay and get beaten. Amon knew that if he stayed, he would be chased and beaten by Medici and Lynn. If he didn't leave, others might also take the chance to sneak in a hit or two. Amon was quite aware of his ability to provoke others. Ha! Seeing this, Medici chased after him, raising his hand to summon a red flame above Amon's head. But Amon wasn't the type to not fight back. Despite the bias in Lynn's intervention, Amon snapped his fingers and stole the flame. Medici nearly tripped, saved from a fall only by his quick reflexes. Amon had tampered with Medici's fate using the Trojan horse of fate, causing the mishap. But as Medici almost tripped, a bolt of lightning struck Amon, who stumbled and got hit, his hair standing on end, looking disheveled. This wasn't the work of a Lord of Storms but the power of a weather warlock. As for why Amon stumbled at the critical moment, Lynn's eyes fell on Ouroboros, who guiltily averted his gaze. Lynn wasn't surprised. He had told Medici about Amon's sealed state, hoping everyone would get their chance to settle scores. Besides Medici, others chose to observe, for now, probably planning to take action during free time later. After all, everyone had suffered under Amon's antics. Though a king of angels, Amon was hard to catch and beat even for Sequence 0 gods. His penchant for provoking others made him almost as unpopular as Medici among high sequence beyonders. Given this rare opportunity, most wouldn't pass it up. As for offending Amon, no one was on good terms with him anyway. Even if alliances were needed later, a simple beating wouldn't prevent cooperation if mutual interests aligned, as shown when Medici temporarily allied with Amon, his half-nemesis, in the fifth epic. Medici and Amon's skirmish, while appearing playful, involved genuine attempts to harm each other. Even a minor stumble hid many layered traps. If Medici had fallen, he would have faced severe consequences. Yet, both kept their confrontation contained, avoiding damage to their surroundings, not wanting to further provoke Lynn. Lynn theatrically shouted, "Stop fighting. If you must, go to the training hall." Pretending he hadn't incited the situation. Then, Lynn turned to Bethel, saying, "Bethel, you know this place well. Please lead everyone to the banquet hall. I'll go watch the fun, stop this farce." Bethel, given no choice, nodded reluctantly, saying, "All right." Watching Lynn eagerly chase after the commotion, Bethel sighed, then addressed the group, "Please follow me." Antigonus, in the corner, relaxed, trying to remain unnoticed. But, Antigonus glanced toward Amon. Perhaps he could also take a quiet shot at Amon later. Clearly, not only Amon and Mr. Door had a fragile alliance, it was the same between Amon and Antigonus. Our perspective shifts back to when Azek, the death consul, arrived at the tea party. This is why Azek saw Medici chasing Amon. After enjoying the spectacle and secretly aiding Medici, Lynn, satisfied, led the isolated Azek to the banquet hall, leading to the earlier scene. Azek, unaware of the previous chaos, dutifully changed clothes and followed Lynn to the banquet hall. Upon arrival, Azek regretted not lingering elsewhere. The hall's atmosphere could stop an angel's heart. The Evernight goddess and the Earth Mother subtly stared at each other, as if a confrontation was about to start between them. The Solomon Empire faction and the Tudor Empire faction were distinctly separated. Despite the lack of overt conflict due to the key provocateur's absences, the tension was palpable. As Lynn led Azek in, all eyes turned to them. The gathered gods and kings of angels, though in their childlike forms, exerted a terrifying pressure. Azek felt out of place, his back soaked with sweat from the intense gazes. It wasn't cowardice but an instinctual response to higher beings. End of chapter. Wow, everyone is so enthusiastic, aren't they? Azek suddenly heard Libert speak next to him. Libert smiled and stepped forward, blocking Azek and saying, "But there's no need to be too enthusiastic. I know I'm loved by all, but your enthusiasm makes me shy." The oppressive atmosphere in the banquet hall suddenly dissipated. For a moment, Azek even thought that everything he felt earlier was just an illusion. But he knew it wasn't an illusion, someone had simply eased the heavy atmosphere in the hall. "Were you scared?" Lynn suddenly leaned over and whispered to him, like a child sharing a secret with a friend. "No," Azek said, glancing around at the gods and angels who were now quietly observing them, shaking his head vigorously despite the lingering tension. "Good, they weren't intentionally targeting you," Lynn said, patting Azek on the shoulder and pushing him toward the group from the Tudor Empire. "The Tudor Empire is currently allied with the Balaam Empire, so I've arranged for you to sit next to Bethel. Don't worry, Bethel will take care of you. I still have to welcome other guests, so I won't accompany you." Azek opened his mouth but said nothing. He obediently sat next to Bethel and tried hard to make himself invisible. In this, he probably had much to discuss with the Antigonus siblings sitting nearby. However, even while minimizing his presence, Azek did not forget the task given to him by the god of death. He diligently noted down every guest arriving at the tea party. Soon, he saw Lynn returning with Will, who was eating ice cream, Amon and Medici, who had finally stopped fooling around, and the last guest, the Lord of Storms, Leodoro. As for Adam, he had long since appeared out of thin air. Thus, the first God's tea party began with all members present. Let's first introduce the layout of the banquet hall. Considering the overall style, The hall used a very typical Eastern arrangement, with round tables as the main feature. Each faction had its own table, and individuals like Azek, who could not represent a faction, were either assigned a specific caretaker by Lynn or seated at a special table, like Will. It's hard not to notice that a group of people looking like children aged 7 or 8 gathered in the hall, each around their own table, really gave the impression of a kindergarten class having a snack. After all the guests were seated, Lynn's gaze swept over these pseudo-children. Satisfied, he snapped his fingers, and a large screen TV, somewhat out of place with the overall style, lit up nearby. Accompanied by its theme song, it began playing, Journey to the West. For a moment, the existence of this TV felt abrupt. What is this? A magical item you created? Medici glanced at the TV and asked, his eyes showing some curiosity and exploration. Not just him, but apart from the Evernight goddess and the true creator, the others were very interested in the TV playing, Journey to the West. They had never seen such a thing and found it fascinating. This is called a television. Simply put, it can play images. I won't go into more detail, you probably won't understand anyway, Lynn said, spreading his hands. What's playing on TV is Journey to the West, a story well known in the pre-epic, the era before the first epic, before the original creator woke up. Before the first epic. Medici narrowed his eyes, still in his somewhat arrogant and mischievous manner, with a flamboyant smile. I originally thought you organized this tea party just to satisfy your whims. Now it seems you plan to introduce us to something interesting. I just thought it was a pity for such an era to be forgotten and buried in the river of history, Lynn smiled. As you might have guessed, the theme of this tea party is exploring the journey of the pre-epic. Upon hearing this, the others did not react much, but Antigonus's ears perked up. For a Beander on the seer pathway, the more ancient history they know, the more useful it is. The others also had varied expressions. Besides the Ammonizes and Saucerer, who were involved in the events, the others knew little about the world's possible destruction in the past. After all, the 7 lights of the spirit world knew that the world's civilization had been destroyed once, and the forsaken land of the gods still retained ruins proving the pre-epic's existence. However, what that destroyed era was like, they did not know. Now hearing Lynn mention it and seeing the bizarre but undoubtedly non-modern aesthetic of the show and the TV clearly marked by another civilization, most of them were intrigued. Even those uninterested did not plan to undermine Lynn. Of course, saying, most, is because there was one brave person who spoke up at this moment. He was none other than the Blood Emperor Tudor, who had the biggest issue with Lynn and was half crazy. Tudor looked up at Lynn, his expression impatient and somewhat cold. But what's the point? That epic is already destroyed, and things that are destroyed should be swept into the trash. Tudor did not notice that as he spoke, the true creator at the table to his left and the Evernight goddess at the table to his right both glanced at him simultaneously, then looked at each other before withdrawing their gazes, as if nothing had happened. Hee. Lynn, of course, did not miss the small interaction between the two gods. He couldn't help but laugh and then looked at Tudor. Mr. Tudor, it seems you indeed did not forcefully switch pathways. Just with this one sentence, you have already offended the future god of fools, the Evernight goddess, and the true creator. You truly are a model for hunters. No wonder your family was in such dire straits after your fall, almost wiping out your bloodline. As Lynn said this, his tone was calm, and he did not seem angry. In fact, he wasn't angry, as his plan originally required a troublemaker. Without a troublemaker, how could his subsequent show of strength appear justified? This is the reason Tudor was present here. TN, if you have another idea of what Lynn can show to the gods on the TV, tell me and I'll change it. HMPH. Hearing Lynn's words, Tudor snorted coldly, clearly not believing him and thinking he was provoking. Maybe you think I'm provoking or cursing you, but sorry, every word I said is true, Lynn said, smiling at Tudor. His gaze swept over everyone in the banquet hall, and he continued calmly, I know Mr. Tudor is not the only one with doubts. Many of you aren't familiar with me and don't know what kind of person I am. But it's okay. During the time we spend appreciating works from the pre-epic, I will give everyone enough time. You can freely exchange information, inquire about me, or discuss possible cooperation. I also have some cooperation plans I want to reach with some of you. This is one of the purposes of this tea party. I hope to become friends with most of you, to help you, and to gain your help. You can understand it as a kind of equivalent exchange. And if we help you first, how can we be sure you will help us in return? Lilith suddenly asked, piercing the warm atmosphere of the tea party. After all, not everyone here was a friend of Lynn. Even those who had already cooperated with him, like the Evernight goddess, obviously didn't mind using this opportunity to gather more information. Lynn was unfazed, still smiling. Whether you believe it or not is your choice. I do not force anyone to believe in me or cooperate with me. I don't think anyone here is foolish, you all have your own judgment. The purpose of the tea party is communication and exchange, nothing more. If anyone wants to leave now, feel free to do so. But if someone wants to disrupt the tea party. Lynn snapped his fingers again. Instantly, almost everyone's expression changed. In that brief moment, everyone felt as if they had become weak and powerless, losing most or even all of their abilities. Although their powers returned after about 3 seconds, the short duration was enough to make an impact. 3 seconds can decide the outcome of a battle between gods. Lynn's voice sounded again. I hope that person is tough enough. I'll try to hit gently and choose a scenic grave for them. Lynn knew that dealing with a group of Sequence 0s and Kings of Angels required more than just goodwill. He needed to show strength to make these proud, detached beings take him seriously. Even the Evernight goddess, who had already cooperated with him, likely had doubts about his strength. Lynn's actions were to clear those doubts and make it clear to everyone, yes, my fist is bigger, and if you can't beat me, don't think about causing trouble. Otherwise, constant probing would be inevitable. Of course, Lynn didn't deny that he used a trick. Normally, he couldn't face so many gods and angels simultaneously unless he borrowed great old one-level power. He managed that feat because he had specially modified the space for the tea party. In simple terms, Lynn borrowed the power of the venue. Lynn also knew that some would see through this. He expected it, being overly strong would also cause rejection. He wanted to create an impression of strength but not excessive, to avoid a united resistance like what happened when the god of death triggered the Pale Disaster. As for those who knew the truth about Lynn's strength, he trusted them to keep it a secret. If anyone still tries to cause trouble, it's perfect timing to deal with them. Lynn thought. Seeing the gods and angels quieting down and communicating with their eyes, he smiled and said. Of course, the main aim of this tea party is still for most participants to enjoy. Besides cooperating with me, you can also reach agreements among yourselves under my witness. I will ensure the fulfillment of transactions for a small fee, and those who breach the agreements will face appropriate penalties. You can treat this as a common Beyonder gathering, but with participants at your level or close to it. You can cooperate, exchange information, or complete transactions right here at the tea party. Lynn smiled, tilting his head to look at the other participants. Also, don't worry about confidentiality. Without my permission, no one can leak what happens here. Hearing this, the gods and angels were surprised, except for those from the Solomon and True Creator Alliance. As the Black Emperor, Solomon was sensitive to the power of rules and had sensed something when he received the invitation. Black Emperor Solomon spoke up, so you set an oath on the invitation. Strictly speaking, it's a user confidentiality agreement, Lynn corrected, making a joke that only transmigrators would understand. Then he looked at the others, smiling, and I didn't hide it. The invitation clearly states that by accepting the invitation, participants cannot disclose details of the tea party without the host's consent. As for how a Sequence 0 knot of the Justiciar pathway could establish such an oath for Sequence 0s, the answer was simple, true self equals cheating. In that case, it's our negligence, Lilith said, her tone softening. But even if outsiders don't know, participants can still see or hear the transactions. What about that? If you want secret cooperation or transactions, I can provide private rooms where no one can eavesdrop. Other than that, no guarantees, Lynn explained unhurriedly. After all, I'm just a weak, pitiful, helpless host. You can't expect too much from me. End of chapter. Weak. Pitiful. Helpless. Do you want to hear which of these words can describe you? Someone was speechless. They couldn't understand why Lynn, who had been showing such a strong and domineering demeanor since appearing, had the face to say such things. However, despite being speechless, they had some thoughts about the situation, so the Lord of Storms spoke up, looking somewhat irritable. If the content of the transaction involves harming one of the participants at the tea party, will you supervise both parties after the deal is made? Although his tone was urgent, Leodoros' words were undoubtedly to the point. Hearing this, Lynn glanced at the Lord of Storms and then smiled. I think you misunderstood something. I only guarantee the safety of everyone present during the tea party. What you do outside of this time is none of my business. For example, if Solomon and the true creator decide to kill Tudor, and they choose to do it during the tea party, I will stop them. But at any other time, it's between the three of them. Whether I get involved or not depends entirely on my own will. Lynn said this with a very relaxed attitude. The Blood Emperor Tudor's face turned livid upon hearing this. Tudor knew that Lynn was targeting him, but he also knew he couldn't defeat Lynn. Even his three closest confidants had already become Lynn's followers. So, does anyone have any more questions? Lynn smiled again. If not, let's continue today's journey of exploring the pre-epic. The true gods and angels present looked at each other. Finally, the Evernight goddess spoke. When will the next tea party be held? We haven't set a specific time yet. After all, frequent gatherings of people like us would make others wary. Lynn joked, when I decide on the time, I will send invitations to everyone promptly. At this point, Lynn seemed to remember something and revealed a mysterious smile. Of course, the invitation might not reach you in this epic. Next time, I might invite your future selves. Those who understood Lynn's words were naturally shocked, while those who didn't understand looked at those who did with puzzled expressions, deciding to ask them privately later. Then I have no more questions. The Evernight goddess resumed her quiet demeanor. The others remained silent as well, not because they had no questions, but because they had reservations and wanted to learn more about Lynn before asking. Seeing that the group had finally quieted down, Lynn nodded in satisfaction and smiled. Then let's continue enjoying Journey to the West. Lynn organized the tea party of the gods for several reasons: to satisfy his own quirks, to leave more marks of himself in this world, to facilitate cooperation with the gods, and ultimately to build a platform similar to the Tarot Club. After all, creating a platform is the most profitable. Lynn knew that at first, the true gods and angels would be cautious and only engage in minor transactions. But as time went on, the tea party's credibility grew, and he became more familiar with the other true gods and angels. Lynn could turn this platform into a top-tier trading event of Sequence 0 level. It might seem thankless, but the hidden benefits are substantial, such as intelligence and connections. As for the possibility of someone not participating anymore, it's simple logic. Unless everyone trusts each other and believes that no one else will attend the tea party or won't collaborate against them during it, those who attend once are unlikely to miss a second time. Who can tolerate a group of gods and angels conspiring behind their backs without knowing anything? Attending the tea party at least provides a chance to discover some clues in advance. Not attending means being blindly played by others. In the mysteries world where high-sequence beings constantly scheme against each other, complete trust is impossible. Lynn could even imagine some of them promising each other not to attend, only to find each other at the tea party, creating an awkward situation. Hopefully, no one would be so unlucky, or he'd feel secondhand embarrassment for them. The television played a famous scene with Sun Wukong, making Lynn almost laugh out loud. By the way, Lynn hadn't started playing Journey to the West. From the beginning, he had selected and played the important and funny parts. Due to the limited time the historical projection could be maintained, and needing constant renewal, even with his hacks, Lynn wasn't a professional fool, so he could only selectively play some content. Lynn glanced at the various gods in the banquet hall, each deep in thought, and gave them enough time to ponder. Then he saw Antigonus seriously watching the television screen, clearly trying to absorb the history of the pre-epic. Lynn thought for a moment and walked over to Antigonus. Are you curious about the history of the pre-epic? Antigonus's body stiffened, obviously conflicted, but eventually, he nodded. I am a bit curious. I like dogs who love learning, you're quite promising. Lynn patted Antigonus on the shoulder and then produced a book from nowhere, placing it in front of Antigonus. It was a translated version of Journey to the West. Here, the original, Journey to the West. Enjoy. If you find it good, feel free to recommend it to others. Lynn said, producing a few more translated classics like Romance of the Three Kingdoms and others. These are works from the pre-epic. Take your time to appreciate them. If you can help promote them so more people can enjoy these works, that would be great. Lynn smiled. Spreading the culture of the pre-epic and reviving the glory of Earth's civilization in this epic, starting with me. As for whether Emperor Russell would become socially dead because of this, it was bound to happen eventually, wasn't it? Antigonus's eyes swept over the classics, feeling something was off but still nodded. I will. The other true gods and angels subtly glanced at the books. While some were not interested in the pre-epic, most didn't mind learning about that epic. Lynn smiled, hiding his success. He hadn't forgotten this tea party was themed around exploring the pre-epic. Even if the pre-epic could never return, if the cultural treasures of humanity could spread in this world, it would be a different kind of rebirth and continuation. At least people would remember that such an epic, such a brilliant civilization, once existed. End of chapter. The movie, Journey to the West, is not short, but for a group of true gods and angels who theoretically can live until the world ends, it is certainly not long. After this movie, Journey to the West, Lynn noticed the beings at the banquet were getting restless. Clearly, the true gods and angels were eager to communicate and understand the situation. Therefore, Lynn chose to give these gods some free time, as he also needed to discuss matters concerning the Church of the True Creator with Solomon. Thus, the number of people in the banquet hall dwindled quickly. Most true gods and angels chose to move to more hidden corners, gathering in small groups to communicate. Lynn noticed that the Lord of Storms seemed to have been led away by the Evernight goddess. It was evident that these two deities had a good relationship in this era, and the Evernight goddess was willing to give the not-so-bright Storm Pigeon some lessons to prevent him from causing trouble that might implicate her. The Death Consul Azek hesitated for a moment before following Bethel. This wasn't a surprising choice. Compared to others, Azek had at least some friendship with Mr. Door from their previous encounters. Moreover, Lynn had specifically asked Bethel to take care of Azek, whom he was nurturing. In such circumstances, Azek teaming up with Mr. Door was the best choice. As for Bethel, he still had the tutor team with him. It was clear he wanted to appease the Blood Emperor's temper, but the effect was not very good. Amon had disappeared at some point, and Adam as well. However, as the controller of this space, Lynn knew that these two brothers were actually hiding in some corner, discussing something. As for Earth Mother Lilith, Lynn noticed she went in the direction where the Evernight goddess and the Lord of Storms left. Perhaps after the Evernight goddess finished tutoring the Storm Pigeon, the two goddesses would have another meeting. The Solomon and True Creator camp hadn't left either, which wasn't surprising. After all, they were like a friends group, having the closest relationship with Lynn and understanding him the best, with no worries. Will also didn't leave, still sitting on his small stool, eating specially made ice cream. It was clear he didn't want to go out and occasionally glanced in the direction of Ouroboros with a thoughtful expression. Antigonus and his sister, the Mother of the Sky, had already put their heads together, seriously reading Journey to the West. The two demon wolves looked completely engrossed, making Lynn feel somewhat emotional. Little Antigo and his sister were truly homebodies of the century. It was obvious to any observant person that the godly tea party he established could significantly influence the current situation of the Four Emperors' War. At the very least, they could analyze that his sudden involvement might become a strong fifth faction or a significant support for one of the parties. This was why the true gods and angels eagerly gathered with familiar faces after the viewing ended. Regardless of whether they had any trade needs or if their acquaintances had any information about Lynn, they had to discuss the influence Lynn and this tea party might bring and what actions they should take next. If the members of the Friends group acted out of understanding and close ties with Lynn, Antigonus and his sister had an attitude of not caring about the outside chaos as long as it didn't affect their nation of Evernight. One can't say this attitude of staying in one place is bad, it has its pros and cons. After all, the future destruction of the nation of Evernight had many causes. It could be said that it was because Antigonus recklessly participated in the battle for mysteries, or it could be because Antigonus wasn't strong enough, thus stopping it being an ordinary king of angels. If Antigonus could resist the will of the Lord of Mysteries like Bethel and Klein, he and his nation of Evernight might not have ended up as they did in the original work. Lynn thought this while not paying further attention to the peculiar siblings and strolled over to the true creator's side, sitting directly opposite Medici, extending his hand and saying, "Where's the information? Don't tell me that after all these days, the top conspirer of the Hunter pathway couldn't gather even a bit of information." Right from the start, he used his trademark sarcasm. But one can't blame Lynn. Medici always had an arrogant air as if everyone owed him £8 million, making it hard for anyone to resist being sarcastic. Ha! Don't use your shallow abilities to guess something about the great me. Medici glanced at Lynn, his tone disdainful yet smug. "I'm not like you, with shit for brains. If you went to gather information, you'd probably come back empty-handed." The war angel was performing as usual today. "Yes. I certainly don't have your intelligence. But who cares when I'm already so powerful? Having a perfect brain on top of that would be too unfair to everyone else in this world." Lynn nodded, admitting his lack of intelligence while naturally boasting about himself, then changed the topic. "But smart Medici, can you explain why you fell into someone else's trap and got stewed in a hot pot? Alas, in the end, it was your brother who had to rescue you." Tisk, tisk, tisk. Lynn knew well that old tricks are reliable as long as they work. Sure enough, Medici's confident and arrogant smile stiffened at Lynn's words, and he didn't seem as haughty. Gritting his teeth, he said, "I will make Tudor into hotpot someday." The malice he had managed to suppress with Adam's initial treatment surged up again. With a brother like Lynn, who spoke without reservation and didn't mind explaining, Medici certainly knew what hotpot was. "Good luck. You can do it. I believe in you." Lynn nodded earnestly as if encouraging Medici. But this gesture undoubtedly choked Medici, who calmed his slightly agitated mood and, with a bad temper, pulled out a stack of papers from his pocket, handing them to Lynn, saying, "The information is all here. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me directly." Lynn swiftly accepted the information without immediately reading it, instead storing it in his pocket dimension, then turned to the Black Emperor Solomon. At this moment, the Black Emperor Solomon was also examining Lynn. It was clear that compared to their first meeting, Solomon had more doubts and confusion about him. End of chapter. "Nice to see you again, Your Majesty Solomon," Lynn greeted with a friendly smile. "I didn't expect our second meeting to be under such circumstances, nor did I anticipate that the tea party suggested by the true creator would be such a gathering," the Black Emperor Solomon observed Lynn, even sighing at that moment. "Do you know what reason the true creator gave me to invite me to this tea party?" "Reason?" Lynn asked curiously. He had no idea how the true creator invited Solomon. Under normal circumstances, he might have guessed if it were Saucereer, but he couldn't predict how the mad true creator would do it. After all, he didn't understand lunatics very well. Though, in a sense, little Mr. Bubbles himself wasn't quite normal either. He said, "My child is hosting a tea party and is afraid no one will attend, so I invited you to be the grand finale." When Solomon said this, he gave the true creator a glance with an indescribable expression. The true creator then looked at him. Although his entire face was covered by his clothing, his eyes seemed to say, "Isn't that the case, Solomon? To be honest, even though I had guessed that Libert was probably raised by you, this is just too outrageous, isn't it? Maybe you should wash your eyes and see what your child has done." Solomon no longer wanted to look at the true creator, who might be mad or whose eyes might have been faulty even before madness set in. He turned to Lynn, who had a similarly subtle expression upon hearing his words but did not seem surprised, as if he found the true creator's words perfectly normal. "Solomon. It's confirmed. The ancient sun god might have raised his children this way." In an instant, Solomon felt he had glimpsed the truth. No wonder neither Amon nor Adam, nor this suddenly appeared Libert, were quite normal. One was a troublemaker, and the others were obsessed. It seemed that the ancient sun god didn't know how to raise children properly and was the kind of doting father who spoiled them rotten. Otherwise, how could he have raised them so crooked? Solomon originally thought he might not be a particularly good father, but now, in comparison, he felt he had done quite well. At least his children weren't troublesome or mad. Although not all of them were exceptional and some might not even ensure their promotion to high sequences, they were relatively normal in character and behaved decently. Correction, my first father figure in this world was Sasrir, not the sun god. Lynn suddenly corrected Solomon's understanding. First father figure. Solomon was taken aback by the peculiar term but quickly grasped its meaning. He then looked at the true creator with a complex expression and asked, but isn't Dark Angel Sasrir the sun god's inheritor? For this era's sequence 0s, the relationship between Dark Angel Sasrir and the sun god was no secret. It wasn't a hidden matter but something openly discussed in holy scriptures. TCH. Medici sneered at this moment, glancing at Lynn with habitual sarcasm. It's just that some people are hung up on unnecessary things. But this can't be helped. After all, someone who watched him grow up, his actual age hasn't even increased by a year. Hearing this, the Black Emperor Solomon was momentarily stunned, but he quickly understood Medici's point. He looked at Lynn with some surprise but didn't comment further. Many don't acknowledge the true creator as the ancient sun god, but few deny that Dark Angel Sasrir is the ancient sun god. No, based on Libert's attitude, this should be reversed. He doesn't acknowledge the ancient sun god as Sasrir. Solomon felt like he had gained new insight. I can't help it. I'm just sensitive about issues related to avatars and main bodies. Lynn calmly poured himself a cup of tea, seemingly finding nothing wrong with his perspective. He then looked at Solomon and said, Your Majesty Solomon, I'm here to discuss a serious matter with you. What matter? Solomon's expression became serious, losing any interest in gossip, and he looked at Lynn. From what I know, you and the true creator are genuine allies, having closely collaborated for over 1,000 years, from the first Solomon Empire to the current second Solomon Empire. The true creator has always been your most solid ally. Lynn didn't directly cut to the chase but first reviewed the relationship between Solomon and the true creator. Only then did he slowly sip his tea and say, I think, for such an ally, you wouldn't mind sharing faith within the Solomon Empire, would you? Solomon almost instinctively frowned at these words. He had already guessed what Lynn intended to say, but he couldn't refuse. Because he and the true creator were indeed the most solid allies, and their bond had reached a point where they couldn't separate and choose other allies. In the unique alliances formed during the War of the Four Emperors, the alliance between the Black Emperor Solomon and the true creator was the least fragile. This wasn't to say their emotional bond was particularly strong, but reality and interests compelled them to work together. The Black Emperor Solomon could hardly join forces with the Blood Emperor Tudor or the Night Emperor Trunsoest, and the true creator was in a similar position. Tudor had Adam, who represented the ancient sun god's divinity, by his side, and among the gods behind Trunsoest, three were practically mortal enemies of the true creator. Though this adversarial relationship might resolve in the future, it was the least probable. Solomon also needed the true creator as an ally. As the ancient sun god's inheritor, even reduced to a single pathway and driven mad, the true creator was still more powerful than ordinary sequence 0s. So, faced with Lynn's question, Solomon could only nod and say, I indeed don't mind sharing the empire's faith with my ally. I like your attitude, Your Majesty Solomon. Lynn smiled at Solomon. Then let's discuss establishing a complete true creator church within the Solomon Empire. Hearing this, Solomon wasn't too surprised. He directly asked, What are your plans? Since he couldn't refuse, Solomon didn't want to haggle over this matter. He had always been a decisive person. I've already drafted the initial plan, right here. Lynn took out a stack of parchment from his spatial pocket, then smiled and said, I know no one likes sharing their faith, but perhaps, this matter may benefit you more than it harms you. As Lynn extended his hand towards Solomon, he continued. Let me reintroduce myself, Lynn Sotos, current alias Libert Abraham, current title Mechanical Angel, and future Paragon. Also, the unknown entity capable of beating the mother tree of desire into the ground. I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation in the coming period. End of chapter.